Once upon a time, nature gave us the hummingbirds. In relying on the written records of the scientific man for our information, we soon learn that there are many kinds of them. To date, the count stands at 319 species and 656 forms. Of the world bird population, hummers are strictly American. They reside anywhere from the toe of South America with one species, in Central America, where most of them are to be found, then in North America with fewer species, up to Alaska with only one. To the non-English speaking people, they are known as peck or kiss the flower bird. Some call them rays of the sun. Others just plain fly-sized birds. And as to why they are called zum-zums, murmurers, or hummers as we do, let their wings speak for us. Whoever has seen any hummingbird primping himself, especially after a bath, can truly say that he has seen his wings. But once these flying Pinocchios are airborne, this is the utmost that our normal vision will ever do. However, with modern cinematographic equipment, their flight secrets have been probed. For example, in subjecting this obliging male Allen to our stroboscopic scrutiny, or in taking one picture for every wing beat, we can count 66 beats per second, or about 1 million beats per every 4 hours of flight. Also, with a special fast shutter, or in using a very quick glance of each wing beat, in this case 1/13,000th of a second per glance, we have eliminated the wing's blurry effect. When each stroke is photographed slightly ahead or behind the previous one, it can be seen how the bird can hover or propel himself in any direction by simply changing the tilt of the wings during their rotary or paddling motion. Be informed, though, that the amount of strokes will change according to the bird's size. In fact, from the largest to the smallest species, it differs from 8 to 80 strokes per second, respectively. Color. On this, Audubon's remark, "Glittering fragments of the rainbow bestow these creatures royally. Where else in the world are there birds whose feathers can vary so much in color as they change position in respect to the source of light? You see, in these birds, the plumage color is not of the pigmentary kind, such as these crayons, nor colors of objects, such as these, but instead they are of an iridescent nature, the result of light rays as reflected from a specially shaped glass or precious stone. Thus it is only when he moves that we can see the brilliant change." Of a dozen or so species which inhabit the United States, one in the east and all others more toward the west, only the Calypte Anna does not migrate south. Although the birds are not easily seen while haunting the oaks and eucalyptus trees in their native habitat of this California region, the surrounding home gardens with their variety of flowers sooner or later become a sure attraction for these winged chipmunks. The nectar-laden bloom is of primary choice, but while sucking, he will scoop up any small insect that shares in his taste for sweets. Now, let us finally meet our Calypte Anna. First, the female and star of our story. Then the male, same size, but distinguished from the female by the pronounced iridescence of his crown and gorget. Talking about size, you are correct in assuming that the Anna is comparatively a small bird. How small? Well, with curiosity, plus an improvised scale and cooperation from our female Anna, if she were made of nickel, she would be just about 5 cents worth, providing, of course, that she had a replenished stomach. It was also our eagerness to know why our little Anna had decided to visit this place repeatedly that led us to discover her serious intent of wanting to answer the call of her maternal instinct. For at least 2 days, she had already been working assiduously on the building of this nest, and frankly, we had never expected it. Why? Well, we were in the dead of the middle of the winter season. Too early for nesting, we thought, but of course, we were wrong. As we learned later, the nesting period for the Calypte Annas starts just before Christmas and lasts until the following August. Normally, she makes more than one nest during this period. Anyway, with a bump here and a grind there, things were slowly beginning to take shape. The not-too-distant oak tree grove became a source of many needs. Moss, one of the main ingredients, was usually brought in large quantity and diligently placed, or sometimes woven with twigs, bits of grass, small feathers, threads, hairs, and whatnot, which had been gathered elsewhere. In a single day, as we counted her round trips, they amounted to 160, or an average of 1 every 3 minutes. Sometimes she would have to search a while before she would find what she was looking for. In this case, it was spider web, which was being used to tie the twigs, moss, and other things neatly together, and to ensure that her future nursery would remain well anchored in case a strong wind should ever come. The lichen clinging to the oak tree branches became another item of challenge for her thrusting beak. And although it is reported that they are placed around the nest for camouflaging purpose, our belief is that they are used as blotters to absorb rain. But one can even suspect that here, a feminine impulse may just be giving in to a flair for ornaments. Contrary to some novice mothers who, in practicing, sometimes will work on their first nest for a few days, lay one unfertilized egg, then abandon everything in favor of starting a new one, our Anna proves herself worthy of determination. With dexterity at both ends, how could she miss? At this time, we are 5 days into the construction project, and exterior-wise, nearly finished. But who can think of eggs or little birds without a soft bed to keep them in? Our Anna surely is no exception. And for this, she sees to it that a cotton string in her own backyard will be converted into something for that very purpose. For who or what will dwell here, it will be like laying on a cloud. Yes, this is the male. And if you too are wondering why he is more interested in gallivanting than in domestic affairs, well, let's just say there must be a reason. You see, by nature, the female is so much in love with everything in regard to the raising of the brood that any bird, male or female, venturing close by will be fiercely chased away. A comparison with an average-sized nutshell now should be in order to show the not-so-roomy interior, even when the cup-shaped nest is nearly completed. Every morning, as usual, at the female's departure, our job was to take a close look at things. And lo and behold, on the 7th day, we were rewarded by the sight of a brand new hummingbird egg. Although during the day she kept close guard, it was not until dusk that she came specifically to the nest in order to sit on the egg, so that she could protect it from the cold of night. On the 9th day, or 2 days after the first egg had come, our dear Anna presented us with her second and final egg. During a nesting, 2 eggs is about the right amount for hummingbirds. Having taken the precaution of attaching a string to a small bean so we can now use it without molesting the eggs, we can see how tiny these eggs actually are. They are so small, in fact, that it makes one wonder if there is really anything in them. Perhaps this is far from being an ideal place of privacy for a nesting hummingbird, but newly introduced stationary objects such as ladders, cameras, and spotlights, even if they should be turned on, once they are inspected and found to be harmless, they don't seem to bother our Anna. Anyway, this time, once securely back on the eggs, the long incubating period is about to start. There were times when perhaps she felt drowsy, but during the day she never fell asleep. In fact, even at night, as we would turn on the lights gradually, she would wake up. Should she sleep too deeply now, her body heat would drop too low. The eggs would cool and spoil. This didn't mean that she couldn't leave the nest. On the contrary, with an appetite for about 50 meals a day, which is normal for hummingbirds, She would leave the eggs exposed only for a short period, but quite frequently. And invariably at her return, she would continue to bring in something to improve or to reinforce her home. Perhaps she knew somehow, because the strong wind did come. Sure, she was a little worried, and so were we. But the well-built nest could and did take the punishment. Then, of course, it rained. However, her only concern was to prevent the eggs from getting wet and cold. On the 15th day, with a light tickle to the mother's tummy, she springing from the nest, then circling about for a short while, a new baby hummingbird was slowly cracking his way into the world. With the rejoicing flutter nearly over, her immediate attention became directed toward the little fellow's welfare. At this, naturally, baby's first reaction was to beg for food. When none came, back to the shell he went. However, since Mother knew best, she wasn't about to let him have the upper hand. And beside, there was one more egg, which, for the time being, needed tending. It wasn't until 2 hours later that the mother had decided to introduce him to his first earthly meal. Now, this may not conform exactly with a child's pleasurable feeling of taking milk from a breast or a bottle's nipple, but nonetheless, her ways of transferring food from hers to the baby's stomach are carried out in a careful and safe manner. Inasmuch as the two eggs were laid 2 days apart, only 1 day after the first baby was born, a wiggling second little hummingbird was finally putting an end to an incubating period of 16 days. A period which, according to the rules, could have lasted anywhere from 12 to 18 days. How about that? The mother seems a bit surprised. Actually, when she had left the nest, her intent was only to feed herself and gather food for the firstborn. And strangely enough, the second baby didn't even receive the same treatment as the first one did. But with Mother's next trip in with food, this last arrival was quite determined to get some of that at least. Perhaps it wasn't right to let the older one get too far ahead of him. And now you may ask, why didn't the mother take the shells away? Why bother? With every flight in or out, the crumpled shells blow off the nest in tiny pieces. When we said little ones, we meant just that. Without having touched them, our trick photography shows that one real bumblebee could occupy almost the same space required by the two small birds together. But let's restore things and watch how the nestlings will grow. The progression which they had gone through during the first week of real care was quite evident. Besides their growth, their eyes were practically wide open. Up to the time that they were 2 weeks old, the mother had come occasionally to sit gently over the brood. But considering that everything was taking place within this limited space, the best thing for her to do was to tuck the little ones in and come to the conclusion that 3 in a nutshell was not even for the birds. Right. The mother was no longer staying with her brood at night either. In fact, for the first time in a month up in the oak trees, she was finally able to resume her normal sleep. Incidentally, hummingbirds do change their state of sleep when food is scarce or when it's too cold in order to survive. At night, they can even go into a state of hibernation. We rigged up a thermometer to check these temperature changes, but before we got too involved in figuring out where to take readings on a grown bird, the logical thing was to rely on the unsuspecting nestlings. We had already registered a low of 90 degrees at night, but when this was repeated in the daytime, the readings reached a high of 102 degrees. A 12-degree change from high to low is quite amazing. With every new day came a new discovery. On their 17th day of life, they were to experience the first real flying tryout, coinciding more or less with the time when the iridescence of their feathers was making its appearance. It was actually new for them, but they took to it in stride just as if they had expected it. As for the mother, we don't recall when we had seen her happier. At 3 weeks old, they seized upon every opportunity to warm up the motors. And in a few more days, they were getting very suspicious and ready for any eventuality. Only one nestling was there to meet us early in the morning of the 25th day. The other was sitting on a fence a few feet above the nest. The mother, naturally, by now, was doubly concerned. If it wasn't for this spontaneous cry, the mother would never find them once they changed place. Likewise, it's the mother's chirp that tells them of her presence. By now, the other one was gone too. But don't worry, Mother would soon find him. And when it happens, refueling this time is done in flight. For a spell, everybody seemed happy. Mama was resting and keeping a watchful eye on them, while the well-fed youngsters were beginning to enjoy some freedom by sticking their noses on everything around them. But when Mother returned, she had some set plans for the offspring. She was to make them understand that they were to follow her. How could she accomplish it? Well, regardless of their cries, the scheme was this: no come, no food. So in a few hours' time, by having used convincing means of communication, the mother had had her nestlings move step by step from two unsafe places, spaced far apart, and had them land safely and fairly close to each other on a nearby eucalyptus tree. They were way up from us among the backlighted shimmering leaves when they received a well-deserved lunch. And before they went even higher, we saw the youngsters together for the last time. For weeks, we waited. But once they had left the nest, none of them returned. Then came the time to say goodbye to Mother Anna. Meantime, up in the trees, the young birds, unconcerned about her departure, were individually reaping the harvest of her teachings. Like their ancestors, they too were eventually drawn to the garden's blooms, wasting no time in becoming expert stabbers. Even learning how to catch insects in flight came natural to them. On the evidence that one of them was turning out to be a male, he became our only aim. Our attention was directed to his feathers, because we had noticed that he had many new ones around his neck, ready to come out. Within a few weeks, sometime between the end of summer and the fall season, by having gone through the changing of the feathers, our young bird had finally emerged a fully decorated male. As for the life expectancy of this species, the answer is yet unknown. Besides his unusual plumage, his swiftness, and minute size, curiosity now came to rank high among his strange traits. In investigating anything that showed any sign of color, the reason perhaps was to discover some new source of food. On the basis of this, would he respond favorably if we were to try to give him some? In our preparations, we used first 1 part of sugar. To it, we added about 5 parts of water. Then a dab of coloring for purpose of attraction. And when everything had been mixed into a palatable concoction, it didn't take too long before he made a friendly approach. Of course, he knew well that we would never catch him. Yes, our Anna is among the few species that actually sing. His is a modest chant, and yet charming for this girl who has taken stand to lure a temporary mate. In order to assert his masculinity, he must disperse intrusions. However, she is not about to wait for long. So when he returns, there is an animated search to relocate her. As it is, a wiser but not quite so spunky male has just moved in. Now, none of that, old man. En garde. This fancy pass is meant to hold her still a while, so with his eyes fixed on her, as not to lose the target, he now climbs slowly but higher and higher. Then, as he is ready to come down in a precipitous dive, which will end by sweeping close over the girl, his tail feathers emit that whistling sound. As this goes on more times, let us tell you that occasionally a male will even dive on other birds, but where 30 miles an hour horizontal flight is tops for him. In a dive for love, the speed will reach 60 miles per hour. Everything he has to win her is on display. She is convinced. So up in the air they go, where the actual mating will soon take place.